12 learners, welcome to today's history lesson. My name is Dimpon Tlabati. This lesson is brought to you by the Northern Cape Department of Education in collaboration with Pakama Research and Development. Now, learners, we are still on the civil resistance 1970s to 1980s, particularly in South Africa. The subtopic is still Black consciousness. Now let us quickly move on to the focus of today's lesson, which is the lesson objectives. Now, if you remember in the previous lesson, which is the lesson before this one, we were still on Black consciousness, but the focus was more on essay writing skills. So today we are moving on to the content. So in this case, we will be looking at points and information that you can include in your body, where now you write a paragraph with your line of argument. So by the end of this lesson, learners, you should be able to discuss and explain the following. You should be able to explain the nature and aims of Black consciousness as stipulated in the examination guideline, page 6, and the CAPS document, page 9. You should also be able to discuss the role of Stephen Bantu Biko, or Steve Biko as he is well known. And then in this case, we are not going to be looking at the social life of Steve Biko, but we are going to be looking at how Steve Biko actually played an important role in promoting the philosophy of Black consciousness. And lastly, learners, you should be able to discuss the Black consciousness movement. So the focus of today's lesson is on the aims of Black consciousness, the role of Steve Biko, which is the role that he played in promoting the philosophy of Black consciousness. And lastly, it will be the focus on Black consciousness movement. Now, learners, as your baseline assessment, just to check your level of understanding, I would like you to actually answer these two questions, which are based on our previous discussion or based on our previous lesson. Number one, learners, I would like you to give a detailed explanation of the concept Black consciousness. What we mean by Black consciousness? What is your understanding of Black consciousness? And then number two, I want you to briefly give reasons for the emergence of the Black consciousness philosophy in South Africa in the late 1960s. Why was it important for this philosophy of Black consciousness to be promoted in South Africa in the late 1960s? What exactly happened in the late 1960s that led to the promotion of Black consciousness? So now, learners, you have 2 minutes to think of the answers, and then after that we will discuss. Welcome back, learners. Hope you had enough time to think of the answers for the two questions. Now let us go through the answers together. Now the first question wanted you to actually explain what Black consciousness is. In this case, learners, from our previous lesson, you should know by now that Black consciousness is not a political party, but a philosophy or an ideology. So now in this case, your point of departure should be, it is a philosophy or an ideology or an idea that was instilled in Black people that actually promoted or advocated Black pride and values. Now, this philosophy actually encouraged Black people to liberate themselves against any oppression. But in order for them to be able to do that, they had to first change their thinking and their attitude. They had to first start believing that they are actually superior. They had to be proud of who they are. Not only who they are, but they had to also be proud of their culture and identity as well. Now, Black consciousness is actually saying everyone who was discriminated by the apartheid system should be regarded as Black. So in this case, the word Black does not refer to the color of the skin, but it refers to all those who were oppressed by the apartheid system. So now I'm sure by now you understand what Black consciousness is. It is a philosophy that promotes or advocates Black pride and values. It encouraged Black people to liberate themselves against any form of oppression, but it actually stated that now it should start in Black people's mind and attitude. They should have a positive attitude towards themselves so that they can be able to stand up and fight against any oppression. Now, by now, you should also know that Black consciousness replaced the word non-white with the word Black. Black did not refer to the color of the skin, but to all those who were oppressed. Now, let us move on to the next question. The next question actually expected you to explain the reasons for the emergence of Black consciousness in South Africa, particularly in the late 1960s. So here, the question actually wants you to explain what exactly happened in the late 1960s that actually led to the promotion of Black consciousness as a philosophy. Now, in this case, remember that after the Sharpeville massacre, political parties or active liberation movements such as the ANC and the PAC were banned by the National Party government. This basically means that they were not allowed to operate or exist in South Africa. And main members of these political parties were either imprisoned or they went to exile. So now this created a gap. Remember, these are political parties that were active in the resistance against apartheid. Now they are no longer allowed to operate. Now they are banned. So this basically means that the banning actually created a political vacuum or a political void or space. Now, this space had to be filled because apartheid was still there. Political parties that were fighting against apartheid were banned, but apartheid was still there. So Black people had to continue to fight. But now, remember, active political parties were banned. Now, this is where Black consciousness came in to fill the gap that was created by the banning of the political parties. Now, Black consciousness came in by actually encouraging Black people to stand up and fight, by actually encouraging Black people to start seeing themselves as superior, start being confident, and start valuing themselves as Black people. And it actually argued that if Black people start seeing themselves as superior, if they start being proud of who they are, they will then realize that they deserve better, and that is when they can fight against any form of oppression. So now the reasons for the promotion of Black consciousness in the late 1960s is that, number one, active political parties were banned after the Sharpeville massacre. So now this actually created a void. And again, active political members of these organizations were also either imprisoned or they went to exile. So now again, this created a political void or political vacuum that had to be filled by the philosophy of Black consciousness, where now Black people were encouraged to stand up and fight because those political parties that they relied on were now not allowed in South Africa. Now, let us go through the concepts that we will be actually mentioning a lot in this lesson. Number one, the first one is Black consciousness, of which we discussed in the previous slide to say it is a philosophy that advocates or promotes Black pride and values. And now let us just to remind you, remember when we talk about Blacks, we are not referring to Africans only. We are referring to, in this context, it does not refer to the color of the skin. It refers to all those who were oppressed by the policy of apartheid. Now, number two is non-racial. Non-racial means not related to any racial factor or discrimination. So when we say an organization is non-racial, it actually means any person of any racial group is allowed to join the organization. Now, it does not discriminate based on any race. So in this case, any person of any racial group is allowed to join. Therefore, we say this organization or this liberation movement is non-racial. And then number three is movement. So when we were discussing the lesson objectives, the third one is, remember, if you can recall from the previous slide, is that we had to focus on the Black consciousness movement. So by now we know what Black consciousness is. So it is important for us to also understand what we mean by the word movement. So a movement is an organized effort, not by an individual, but by a group. So in this context, when we talk about by a group, we are actually referring to Black people. We are referring to Blacks. It's an organized effort by a group. So in this case, an effort by Black people. It says here, organized effort by a group of people to achieve a particular goal, mainly a social or a political one. So now in this case, when we discuss Black consciousness movement, we will actually unpack the meaning of the word Black consciousness movement so that you understand what we mean by Black consciousness and what we mean by Black consciousness movement. They are two different things. Now, when we say Black consciousness, remember this is a philosophy. Now, we also need to understand what we mean by Black consciousness movement, but this will be discussed in the upcoming slides. For now, let us move on. Now, for us to also move on, we need to understand what this philosophy actually wanted to achieve. What were the aims of Black consciousness? Black consciousness actually wanted to raise self-respect and confidence of Black people. This basically means that it wanted to make sure that Black people respect themselves. Black people have confidence. They become confident on who they are. They become proud of being Black people. They should stop seeing themselves as second-class citizens of South Africa. They should also start feeling superior as citizens of South Africa as well. So in this case, Black consciousness wanted to actually get rid of Black people's feeling of inferiority. It wanted them to stop feeling inferior. It wanted them to start feeling superior. And then the second one is to liberate Black people, to make sure that they liberate themselves and also end their dependence on white people. So this basically means that Black consciousness wanted to make sure that Black people start doing things, or they start being involved in the struggle by themselves without relying on white people. It wanted Black people to be independent. It wanted Black people to be self-reliant, meaning to rely on themselves without relying on white people. And then the last one is to promote unity among Black people, just to make sure that they work together as Black people. And then remember here, when we talk about Black people, remember it does not refer to the color of the skin. So in this case, it wanted to make sure that Black people, to be specific, Indians, colors, and Africans work together and do what? And fight against apartheid without relying on who? Without relying on white people. So now in this case, in this lesson, as much as we will be discussing the content, we are also going to be looking at how Black people in this case actually promoted the ideas of Black consciousness, and actually also how they implemented those ideas. Remember, they had to understand what Black consciousness is, and then at the same time, they were expected to implement the ideas or put them into action. So now we are going to be looking at how Black people actually implemented the ideas of Black consciousness. Remember, we need to understand before we move on to the next slide, the aim was to make sure that they become confident, they respect themselves, they stop seeing themselves as second-class citizens, and then they actually shy away from the feeling of inferiority. They should now start feeling superior. But it did not end there. Black consciousness also wanted to make sure that Black people unite, meaning they work together and fight against the policy of apartheid together as a team. And then at the same time, it wanted to make sure that they become independent. So they stop relying on white people. It wanted to end Black people's dependence on white people. So it basically wanted to make sure that Black people are involved in political activities or do things on their own without relying on whites. So now let us move on to the role of Steve Biko. Now, learners, as we are discussing the role of Steve Biko, I want us to keep this question in mind so that we can be able to understand what is expected from us, which content are we expected to discuss in this topic. So now in this case, this is the same question that we actually dealt with in the previous lesson. But remember, in the previous lesson, we are focusing more on essay writing skills. So today, the focus is more on the content. So now remember, we used this same question to actually write a contextualized introduction and a conclusion as well. So today the focus is more on the body. We are actually looking at what information can we include in the body to answer this question. So now it says here, Steve Biko, this is a statement, remember, as per our previous discussion, remember there are 3 types of essay questions. Now the first one can either be, do you agree, to what extent, or critically discuss. So in this case, the question is, do you agree? But let us first go through the statement. The statement says, Steve Biko was considered a mastermind behind the birth or emergence of Black consciousness in South Africa, which influenced Black people to challenge the apartheid system in the late 1960s and 1970s. Now, the statement is basically saying Steve Biko was the mastermind, was the main man behind the emergence or the birth of Black consciousness. Where? In South Africa, but it does not end there. It says this Black consciousness also influenced Black people to challenge apartheid in the late 1960s and 1970s. So now, the question now says, do you agree with the statement? I think in the previous lesson, we took a stance where we indicated that one may agree with the statement due to Steve Biko promoting the philosophy of Black consciousness, which also led to the establishment of different organizations such as SASO, SASM, and BAU as well. So now in this case, the introduction part we discussed in the previous lesson. Now the focus now is on the body. So now, but as we are discussing the body, we should take this question into consideration. Now, what role did Steve Biko play that makes us say he was indeed the mastermind behind the birth or the emergence of Black consciousness? So we know, this is a revision, learners, we know by now that Steve Biko indeed played a very important role in promoting the philosophy of Black consciousness. And he did not only promote the philosophy of Black consciousness in different universities. This philosophy was also promoted in high schools, in the workplace, and also in the communities. So he played a very important role in making sure that Black people understood the philosophy very well. He tried by all means to make sure that Black people actually understand and implement the idea of Black consciousness so that they can be able to resist or to fight against the apartheid system. So now, the role of Steve Biko. What role did Steve Biko play? Now, we need to understand that based on what we already know, we know that Steve Biko actually became involved in politics when he was a medical student at the University of Natal. Now, when he arrived there, there was a non-racial organization called NUSAS. Non-racial organization called NUSAS. Now, what do we mean by non-racial? Non-racial, remember from our concepts, it actually means that every person of any racial group was allowed to join, whether Black or white. So this organization did not discriminate based on the racial groups. So every person of any racial group was allowed to join. So when Steve Biko arrived at the University of Natal, there was this organization or student organization called NUSAS. In full, it is known as National Union of South African Students. It was non-racial, so any person of any racial group was allowed to join. Hence, Steve Biko became a member of this organization. But there are things that were happening in this organization that actually made Steve Biko to actually doubt his involvement, that actually made Steve Biko to actually not be satisfied with how things are done. So now, what are those things? Number one, this organization called NUSAS was white dominated. It means most of the members were white or were white liberals. And then the second one is, as much as NUSAS was claiming to be against apartheid, it still adhered to some apartheid laws. For example, when they attended a conference at Rhodes University, the same organization actually allowed Black people and white people to sleep and eat separately. So in that case, it actually separated Black people and white people, where they were now forced to sleep separately and eat separately as well. So now these are some of the things that made Steve Biko not to be happy to be part of the organization. This actually made him to believe that Black people needed their own organization to speak for themselves without relying on white people. Now, if you go back to the aims of Black consciousness, you will remember that one of the aims was to liberate Black people and end their dependence on whites. Now, here is Steve Biko believing that. Let us go through this point. It says, Biko felt that Blacks needed their own organization. Now, own organization. So it means now their own organization away from the one of white people, or the one that included white people. So now this is what? This is self-reliance. This is independence. So now he believed or felt that Black people needed their own organization to speak for themselves, not the one associated with white liberals. Even if they were against apartheid, Steve Biko believed that it's high time now Black people should now put an effort to have their own organization where they will be able to speak for themselves or represent themselves without the involvement of white people, even if they were against apartheid. Now, what did Steve Biko do together with other Black people? They decided to actually start their own organization, which was now called SASO, South African Students Organization. So now this organization was only meant for Black people. Was only meant for Blacks. So they broke away from NUSAS because Steve Biko believed that Black people needed their own organization to speak for themselves without relying on whites, even if they were against apartheid. So they formed SASO, which was only meant for Black people. Now, if we look at this cartoon here is SASO. This lady here represents SASO. You can see there, it's written SASO. And then now, this lady called SASO is actually kicking the white sheep away from the organization. So this basically means that, and allowing the Black sheep to approach her. So now this basically means that SASO did not allow white people to join. Even the ones that were against apartheid. Remember, we cannot assume that all white people were in support of apartheid. There were those who were against the system of apartheid, and they were willing to assist black people in their struggle. But now, this organization called SASO did not allow them to join. Those white students who wanted to be part of SASO were not allowed to do so, or they were not allowed to join. So therefore, SASO was only meant for blacks or black people. This would be your Indians, colors, and Africans. So now let us go through the first point. It says Biko and other leaders, including Pityana as well, broke away from NUSAS to form an organization for black students called SASO, South African Students Organization. That was only meant for black students. Remember, this is a time whereby Steve Biko was still a medical student at the University of Natal. So hence here we are focusing more on the students. So SASO was for university students. It wanted to promote the philosophy of black consciousness in the universities. So now, next bullet point. It adopted and promoted black consciousness. BC stands for black consciousness, and excluded white students. So now, if you can notice this, here SASO is actually implementing the ideas of black consciousness. If you go back to the aims, remember we discussed the aims. One of the aims was to unite black people and make sure that they fight the policy of apartheid together. Now an organization is being formed only for black students. So now this actually will make sure that black people unite. As they will be joining the organization, they will be doing what? They will be uniting, and they will be working as a what? As a team. So now they are actually promoting the ideas of black consciousness, and they are also implementing them. And the other aim was to make sure that black people become independent, to make sure that black people stop relying on whites. So now again here, they are forming their own organization without the involvement of whites. So this basically means that now here in this organization, they are going to be independent. They are going to start doing things on their own. They are going to start being involved in political activities on their own without relying on whites. So I'm sure it's clear to you that indeed SASO was actually promoting and implementing the ideas of black consciousness. And then what reasons did Steve Biko give for excluding white people, particularly white liberals, in this organization? Remember, there are those white liberals who are willing to assist, those white liberals who are against apartheid, and they wanted to go all out and assist black people in the struggle. But SASO was saying, no, thank you. Why did SASO and Steve Biko actually decide to exclude white people? Now, one other reason that Steve Biko gave was that all white people benefited from apartheid. Therefore, they don't know how it feels to be oppressed. So now Steve Biko is actually saying there is no way that white people can assist in the struggle against apartheid because they were never oppressed. So they don't know how it feels to be oppressed. So it's not going to be possible for them to understand the struggle. The only people that will be able to understand the struggle are those that were actually oppressed by the apartheid system. So now here's one of the reasons. Now Biko believed that all white, not all people, learners, all white people benefited from apartheid. Therefore, they had no place in the struggle and in black consciousness. So this is basically what I said to say. He believed that they actually don't know how it feels to be oppressed. Therefore, they don't have any place in the struggle and in Black consciousness. So that is one of the reasons why he actually excluded them from SASO. And then he actually said or advised white liberals or those white people with good intentions, those who are willing to assist. He actually said to them they should go back to their communities and educate other white people about the evilness of apartheid. So they should go and tell them how evil apartheid is. He actually said that is the only way they can help. He said they should go back to their communities and educate other white people about the evilness of apartheid. So this is basically what I said. He encouraged whites with good intentions, meaning those who are willing to help, to go back to their communities and do what? And educate other whites about the evils of apartheid. They should go and tell them how evil apartheid is. But as for them being involved in the struggle, he actually argued that it will not work because they don't know how it feels to be oppressed. So therefore, they don't have any place in the struggle and in Black consciousness. Now, what role did SASO play in challenging apartheid? How did SASO challenge apartheid? Remember, this is an organization that was formed by university students that excluded white students. So it means now it was only meant for Blacks. Now, how did SASO challenge apartheid? Now, SASO, led by Steve Biko, you need to take note that Steve Biko was the leader of this student organization. Now, SASO spread Black consciousness ideas in campuses of ethnically separated universities. So now, remember, I said to you, SASO was for university students. So now SASO spread BC ideas in campuses of ethnically separated universities. Now, it also promoted unity and solidarity amongst Black students. So now it made sure that Black people are united, particularly the students. They are united. They work together as a team to fight against apartheid or any oppression. Now, basically, we can say SASO actually made the students politically aware. It actually encouraged them to stand up and fight against apartheid. But it did not end there. SASO also organized liberation programs. So now, the students, as you can see here, where now the students were now taught on how to actually resist apartheid. Now, because of those liberation programs, a new breed of youth leaders who were well equipped and well informed started to do what? To emerge, and they started to fight against the policy of apartheid. Now, if you go through this point, it says SASO organized liberation programs. Now, these liberation programs actually educated young students on how to actually go about resisting the policy of apartheid. Now, it says it organized liberation programs that produced a new breed of youth leaders who were well equipped to challenge apartheid. So now, because of these programs, now Black people had new youth leaders who were now well informed, well equipped, and well prepared to do what? To challenge the apartheid system. So now I hope you understand how SASO actually challenged the apartheid system. It challenged the apartheid system by actually making students in universities aware of the need to stand up and fight against apartheid. It actually made students politically aware and politically active as well. It actually united students in different Black students, to be specific. It united them in their struggle against apartheid. It also organized liberation programs where now students were taught how and trained on how to resist apartheid. So because of these liberation programs, they were now youth leaders who were well informed and well prepared to challenge the apartheid system. Now we need to think of this to say now, as these students were graduating and moving out of universities, what happened with the philosophy of Black consciousness? Because at this moment, this philosophy was only promoted in different universities. But what about the communities? What about in the workplace? Because now remember, Black consciousness wanted to make Black people, not only Black students, but Black people confident and also politically aware. But in this case, at this moment, it was only happening in different universities under this organization called SASO. So now, as students were moving out and graduating from different universities, SASO saw a need to actually create structures that were not only focusing on students. Remember, SASO was only for university students. So now SASO saw a need to say, as these students are graduating and becoming part of different communities, there was also a need to create structures and establish organizations that were not only focusing on students. Now, this is what happened. SASO established the Black People's Convention, which is BPC. Now, this BPC is under the Black Consciousness Movement. Now we are discussing Black Consciousness Movement. Remember, I said to you, there's a difference between Black consciousness and Black Consciousness Movement. Now, when we talk about Black Consciousness Movement, remember the word movement actually refers to a group of people working together to achieve a common goal. In this case, a common goal can be social or political. So now in this case, remember, a movement is a group of people, an effort put by a group of people to achieve a common goal. In this case, remember I said to you, when we say a group of people, we are referring to Black people in this topic. They were actually working together to make sure that they promote the philosophy of Black consciousness, to make sure that the ideas of Black consciousness are implemented. So now this became known as what? Black Consciousness Movement. This is where now Black people were trying by all means to work together to make sure that the ideas of Black consciousness are put into action. So in this case, Black consciousness is a philosophy that advocated Black pride and values, that actually encouraged Black people to unite and liberate themselves against any oppression. This philosophy actually wanted to make sure that Black people are independent. They stop relying on white people. So now in this case, Black Consciousness Movement. So it basically means that now Black people were now working together. A group of people working together, putting the effort. So now Black people working together, putting the effort to achieve a common goal. To achieve what? To actually make sure that Black consciousness is implemented, to actually promote the ideas of Black consciousness. Now it means here they were now putting them into action. They were actually trying by all means that what Black consciousness is saying is actually implemented by Black people. So now to actually do that, now SASO actually established what we call the BPC, Black People's Convention. Now, what was Black People's Convention all about? Now, remember what I said to you. I said to you, SASO actually recognized or realized that there was a need to also include Black people to create structures or organizations that were promoting Black consciousness, not only in different universities, but in the communities and in the workplace as well. So now, SASO established the Black People's Convention. Now, what is the Black People's Convention? It is an umbrella organization an umbrella organization that did what? That actually controlled and coordinated all Black consciousness groups and activities. Now remember, because they were trying by all means to implement the ideas of Black consciousness in different communities and workplaces. So now there were going to be different organizations and different activities and programs. So now they needed an organization that would actually coordinate or manage those activities or those groups, as there were now going to be many. So now the role of Black People's Convention as an umbrella organization or as the main organization was to actually coordinate or manage all BC or Black consciousness groups and activities. Now I'm going to give you an example. Here is a diagram. Now remember, the BPC is an umbrella organization, which is the main organization. This is the main organization. Now, under the BPC, there were different activities and different groups that were promoting the philosophy of Black consciousness. Now, which activities and which organizations are we referring to here? Now, under BPC, there were community programs that were established by Black people to promote and implement the ideas of Black consciousness. So now these community programs were actually managed and coordinated by the BPC as the main organization. And then there were different organizations as well, such as SASO for university students, which is the South African Students Organization. And then there were also organizations such as BAU, which is a trade union that promoted ideas of Black consciousness in the workplace. Now, BAU stands for Black Allied Workers Union. And then we also have SASIM, which is an organization for high school students. So now, all these organizations were under BPC, meaning they reported back to the BPC. They were managed and controlled by the BPC as the umbrella organization. So I always give an example of the ANC. Now, in this case, the ANC would be the main political party, which is the umbrella organization. Now, under the ANC, we have the ANC Youth League, the ANC Women's League. They all report back to the ANC. So in this case, the ANC would be the main organization, and then under the ANC, there would be other small organizations such as the ANC Youth League or the ANC Women's League, which are coordinated by the ANC. So in this case, we have the BPC as the main. So under the BPC, there are other organizations and other programs, but at the end of the day, they are still managed or coordinated by the BPC. So now, BPC actually tried by all means to involve adults through community programs, through trade unions, to involve adults in Black consciousness. And then, while SASO was trying to involve students, university students in Black consciousness. At the same time, while SASIM was trying to involve high school students in Black consciousness. So I'm sure you understand what we mean by BPC and what we mean by umbrella organization. It is the main organization, and under this main organizations, there are other small groups of Black consciousness groups, and these groups were managed and coordinated by the BPC. Now, what I need you to do now, remember, we need to structure our paragraphs using the PEEL method. So now in the next slide, the focus is still on Black consciousness movement, particularly on Black People's Convention. Now I want you to come up with your own paragraph based on what you know. Remember, this is a revision based on what you know about Black People's Convention. Now, when you write your paragraph about Black People's Convention, I want you to do the following. Take the peel method into consideration. Remember, in the previous lesson, we discussed the peel method, or we discussed on how to write a paragraph using a peel method. So in this case, I want you to come up with your own paragraph about Black People's Convention. Now, make sure that when you write a paragraph on Black People's Convention, you actually apply the peel method. Now, just to remind you of the peel method, the P stands for point. So meaning now, when you start writing your paragraph, the first sentence of the paragraph should actually state the point. And then the next E, or the next letter, which is E, is for explanation. Now you explain the point. And then the next E will be for evidence or example or elaboration. Now give evidence, give examples, and elaborate. And lastly, the last letter will be the L, which is for link. Remember, this is where you link back to the question or the statement, or forward to the next paragraph. So now I want you rather to come up with your own paragraph, particularly on Black People's Convention. So you write a paragraph based on what you know about Black People's Convention, taking into consideration the peel method and using the same question that we used in the previous lesson. So you use the same question to actually come up with your own information or paragraph on Black People's Convention, taking into consideration this question and also the peel method as well. So now you have just 5 minutes, and then after 5 minutes, I'll be showing you my paragraph of the Black People's Convention with the peel method applied. So you have 5 minutes, learners, to actually come up with your own paragraph. I want to see if you understand how to write a paragraph using the peel method, because now the focus is on the information. But remember, as you are writing the information, as you are writing the body, you need to actually structure your paragraphs using the peel method. So you have 5 minutes to do that, then we proceed. Welcome back, learners. Hope you had enough time to actually come up with your own paragraph on the BPC, which is the Black People's Convention. And hopefully you have also applied the peel method in your paragraph. So now let us go through my example of a paragraph on Black People's Convention with a peel method being applied. Now, since we know that the Black People's Convention actually established different community programs where now adults were also involved in the Black consciousness movement. So now my first sentence of the paragraph, which will serve as a point, remember the first letter, which is P, which is a point where now you are actually expected to state a point. Now here my point is the BPC developed educational and health programs for Black people. It's a point. Now I need to explain my point. Now I'm further explaining to say young Black people were sent to various communities to create and run clinics, which is under health, and also set up literacy campaigns. Remember, I spoke about educational and health programs. Now I'm explaining to say young Black, not white. Remember here the focus is on Black people. Young Black people were sent to various communities or different communities or run clinics and set up literacy campaigns. Now that is my explanation. Now I need to elaborate and give examples. For examples, there were community programs such as Zanempilo Community Health Clinic that was managed by Mampela Rampele. And the word Zanempilo means coming with health rather, coming with health. Zanempilo, coming with health. Now, for example, there were community programs or healthcare centers such as Zanempilo, which was managed by Mampela Rampele, and it only assisted Black people and also employed Black people. And then we also have Solempilo Community Health Center, which also provided medical health care to Black people. And then we have Zimelele Trust, and we also have had winter school projects. So now here I'm elaborating to say there were also community health centers which provided healthcare to Black people and also employed only Black people. And then I go further to say there were also trust funds such as Zimelele Trust Fund, and we also had they also had winter school projects. Now that will be under your elaboration, example, and evidence. And lastly, you need to link back either to the question or to the next paragraph. So I go further to say, here is my linking part to say, projects like this fostered a sense of Black pride, independence, and confidence. Now, remember, this is what Black consciousness required. Remember the statement that says Steve Biko was the driving force or the mastermind behind the emergence of Black consciousness, which actually made Black people to start challenging the apartheid system. So now here it means by creating this project, Black people actually understood the philosophy that was promoted by Steve Biko, which encouraged Black pride, independence, and confidence. So indeed, they understood the philosophy of Black consciousness very well that was actually promoted by Steve Biko. So this will be my linking part. I'm linking back to the philosophy of Black consciousness in the question. So now the next one that I want you to actually come up with a paragraph for is the one of the Black Allied Workers Union, the trade union that was established in the workplace to accommodate Black people and to also promote the philosophy of Black consciousness in the workplace. So now 5 minutes again, come up with your own paragraph applying the peel method again. Welcome back, learners. Hope you have managed to come up with your own paragraph on how the philosophy of Black consciousness was applied in the workplace through an organization called BAU, which is the Black Allied Workers Union. So now, here is my opening statement. Remember, this is an example. BC ideas contributed to the revival of trade unions and labor movements in SA. So this is my point. Now, I need to explain what I mean by this. So I go further to say the Black Allied Workers Union was established by Drake Coker. So what you need to know is that Drake Coker was actually a member of BPC. So now he went further to establish a trade union called the Black Allied Workers Union to actually promote the ideas of Black consciousness in the workplace. Now, this trade union was only meant for Black people. So it rejected white involvement. This actually proves to us that this trade union was actually applying the ideas of Black consciousness. Remember, Black consciousness says Black people must be united. So in this union, Black workers were going to be united. As they were joining this organization, they were going to work together to resist the policy of apartheid without depending on whites. Hence, here it says white involvement was actually rejected or not allowed. So now I go further to give evidence and examples. And now it says, in the early 1970s, Black workers were involved in strike actions. They were now united, striking alone as Black workers, demanding higher wages. It means now they were proud of themselves. They were confident. So now hence they realized that they also deserve better. Hence they decided to demand what? High wages. And their rights as workers to be respected. Can you see now again here, the idea of Black consciousness is coming in. It shows that now Black workers fully understood the idea of Black consciousness, to say they should also regard themselves as superior. They should not allow anyone to oppress them. So now to regard themselves as superior, they were now demanding what? High wages, just like white people. And they also demanded that their rights should also be respected. It means they were fighting against any discrimination and oppression. This is what Black consciousness wanted. So now this would be my explanation. This would be my evidence and example of what I mean based on the point that is given. And lastly, I'm linking now. BC had empowered Black workers with confidence to do what? To challenge the apartheid system. Remember the statement says, Steve Biko was the mastermind behind the emergence of Black consciousness, which encouraged Black people to do what? To challenge the apartheid system. Now I'm linking back to my statement again to say, indeed, BC had empowered Black workers with confidence, which is the ideas of Black consciousness. Now they were confident, which enabled them to do what? To challenge the apartheid system. Now, as you can see in this picture, Black people are protesting, they are united, and they are demanding what they deserve. So now it means they now realized that they also deserve better, which is all because of the philosophy of Black consciousness. Now they understood the philosophy very well, and they were actually implementing its ideas. Now, as your homework, which is actually related to what we will be doing in the next lesson, I want you to answer this question. To what extent did Steve Biko and Black consciousness ideology contribute to the 1976 Soweto uprising? Support your line of argument using relevant evidence. So now here I want you to go and read more, revise more on how Black consciousness actually influenced the 1976 student uprising, particularly in Soweto. This is what we will be discussing in the next lesson. So now just to reflect back and to summarize what we discussed, we have discussed the aims of Black consciousness, which was to free Black people from the feeling of inferiority and to unite them to fight against apartheid. And we've also discussed the role of Steve Biko, that he broke away from NUSAS and he also formed parties. One of the people who formed SASO, which spread the ideas of Black consciousness in different universities, particularly ethnically separated universities. And then SASO had also organized liberation programs that produced a new breed of youth leaders who were well prepared and informed to challenge the apartheid system. And SASO also formed the BPC to involve adults in BCM, in Black consciousness movement. Remember, as students were graduating, SASO felt the need to create structures that were not only focusing on students. Now they wanted to involve Black people in different communities and also in the workplace. That was done through the formation of Black People's Convention, which was an umbrella organization that coordinated all Black consciousness groups and activities. And now BPC established educational and healthcare programs for Black people. And it did not only end there. The philosophy of Black consciousness was also promoted in the workplace, where now Black people had their own trade union called Black Allied Workers Union, where they started to demand high wages and their rights to be respected. And then what you also need to know is that the philosophy of Black consciousness was also promoted by artists as well. There were Black consciousness journals that were published, and they were written and published, which journals such as the Black Voice and Black Review. So these journals were actually promoting the philosophy of Black consciousness. Even artists in theaters, when they were actually performing a play, they would also include ideas of Black consciousness so that people could understand what this philosophy was all about. Now we have reached the end of today's lesson, learners. And let us take a look at what we will be discussing in the next lesson. As I have indicated, that we will be looking at it will still be on Black consciousness, but this time we will be looking at the government response, the National Party's response to Black consciousness movement and to Black consciousness as a philosophy. And lastly, we will be looking at the Soweto uprising. How did the philosophy of Black consciousness influence the 1976 Soweto uprising? So we have reached the end of our lesson. Thank you for watching. See you next time. Bye.